All right, everybody, welcome back. Bio Bros, episode 21. This is a new kind of series for us. We're going to do our top coolest native species, and we're going to pick an area of the world that we're going to keep with. So we're going to do our hometowns first. This week, we're doing Alex's hometown of North Carolina. So expect shortly. Arizona will be coming up soon. And we'll probably do a few places around the world too. Maybe countries, all that just to kind of show native species. Pretty cool. We've got some real cool ones from North Carolina. Funny enough, I actually know more about these North Carolina plants than I know about my own Arizona plants. So we will get right into it on this one today. Alex, what's your first one?
All right, so first one I'm gonna do, I have four for this list. I know Shaw has three. We did say three, but I couldn't decide between two of them. So I'm gonna start with one of the two I couldn't decide between. And I am going to start with, hold on, Exodium disticum. I just needed to remember how to say it, which is the bald cypress. Personally, this is my favorite tree species, just in general. I love them. I just think they look so amazing, and I don't know. It's just something about them. I just absolutely love bald cypress. They're very long-lived tree, um, and it's just a very cool tree in general. They are deciduous conifer, which is not a very common thing either. Um, so they do. That's why they call them the bald cypress, because they do lose all of their needles in the winter and the fall. Um, and they can grow up to 50 to 70 feet tall and about 20 to 30 feet wide, which is a very large tree, obviously. Um, they're mostly found in the coast of North Carolina in that coastal range, but we also have them in the Piedmont. Um, they're such a cool tree because they can grow in moist soil, they can grow in a little bit drier soil. They definitely like more water. They can grow in full standing water as well. They can't germinate in water, but if they germinate and start, and then say a flood comes through or something, and it stays there permanently, or like the edge of a lake, they can grow there and thrive for their entire lives. Another cool thing with them, they have these little growths from their roots called knees, which again, one of my favorite things too. Part of it was the cypress knees, and those are actually to help with oxygen exchange and things like that, or CO2 and oxygen exchange. They grow off of the roots, especially they mostly grow to the knees when they're either in water or in very moist or wet soil, because that way it helps them exchange more CO2 for oxygen, or more oxygen for CO2. And it helps keep that whole root system nice and healthy. They tend to be a pretty slow growing species, but again, just an amazing, really cool species that can live so long. It's not even funny. They also produce little tiny cones because they are a conifer species, so they do produce cones. The male plants or male trees do. Uh, again, just again, an amazing tree. My favorite, one of my favorite trees, and they are found throughout the U.S. Not throughout the U.S., but mostly on the East Coast. But like from Maryland to Texas, and into the lower Mississippi River Valley area, and all of like the Southeast, basically.
Yeah, those knees are super cool. I've seen people use them in scapes before. It looks really
Mm-hmm.
cool. A cool vibe.
Yeah, they're a very cool tree.
Yeah, so I don't know a ton more about them really, but we'll get into my first one here. All three of mine are carnivorous. The American Southeast has some of the best carnivorous plants in the world, if not the best. The only place I can really think of, like more specifically, would be some of the Southeast Asian countries. Those kill it with Nepenthes, and then South Africa. Those are the only places that really even compete. And, I really don't think that anywhere beats the US. So we're starting off with Drosera rotundifolia, round leaf sundew. For those at home who want common names, The reason I chose this Drosera and not other ones, this really isn't my favorite. There's other species that are native to North Carolina that I actually think are cooler. But Drosera rotundifolia is really, really cool to me because it was the first carnivorous plant. Not evolutionarily, just the first time anybody ever found a plant and said, you know what, that actually eats bugs, and proved it. And that person was none other than Charles Darwin himself, same guy from the Galapagos Islands. He saw that these plants were covered in bugs and he said, that's weird, I'm going to figure that out. So he did, being the man of science he was. And they are carnivorous, so they work on what we call like flypaper traps. So they create these little bits of dew on tentacles on their leaves, and bugs are like, wow, that's super cool. It's a little sweet too. And they go on there and they get stuck. And then the leaf will actually move and encapsulate the bug and digest it. It's super, super cool. And this plant is not only native to North Carolina, it is native to pretty much anywhere that's wet in the world. They grow in swamps and bogs, anywhere it's wet. They grow all the way from the United States, throughout anywhere wet in the United States, basically, into Canada, into Europe, all the way into Japan, where this is cool, and I actually have some of these. In Japan, there's a natural hybrid between Drosera spatulata and Drosera rotundifolia called Drosera tokyensis. It's a naturally occurring hybrid, and both of those species are also native to the United States. So it gets around. Really, really cool. Last little bit I'll add on that one is Charles Darwin has some insanely funny quotes and about these Drosera. He really, really wanted to classify them, as an animal. He's something he really wanted to do. He just couldn't ever prove that that was true. If you go to the Darwin Project .ac.uk, it's the University of Cambridge website, you can look through all of his articles and letters and stuff. And there's some really hilarious quotes and videos and stuff in there. They're just about the process of going through finding out that they're carnivorous, like the crazy things they would try to feed these plants to figure out just what happened. It's really cool.
Yeah, those are really cool. I love carnivorous plants as well, and I've actually seen rotundifolia and one other of your three in person in North Carolina, and it's it's crazy that like how easy it is to like walk past them too, because they are like down in the bottom of the like very very close to the ground. There's grasses and stuff all around them. They're very hard to just, or they're very easy to just miss. With certain species at least, the rotundifolia being one of those. But they're a very cool plant for sure.
Yeah, super cool. Carnivorous plants are criminally underrated. They're they're beautiful too. Like they're meant to attract bugs, so they look like flowers almost because what are flowers meant to do? Attract bugs. So they're very, very pretty.
Oh yeah.
All right, we'll move on to your next one.
So my next one is kind of funny because a lot of people are gonna hear the common name and they're gonna be like, "That's in North Carolina." But it's the eastern prickly pear cactus. They are native to North Carolina. Or it's also Opuntia humifusa is the scientific name of it. It is a lot of times actually confused for the southeastern prickly pear. They are two different species, which the other one is Opuntia mesacantha, which that is the southeastern prickly pear. I'm pretty sure they're both native to North Carolina. Don't quote me, I'm not 100% sure on that one, but I know Opuntia humifusa is native to North Carolina. Main difference between those two would be the southeastern prickly pear will get about inch long, pale spines on them, versus eastern prickly pears don't have any spines on them. They both do have barbed bristles, though. They just don't have spines. Or the eastern prickly pear just doesn't have spines. But they're also interesting because a lot of people, when they think of a prickly pear, they don't think of what eastern prickly pears look like, because they do have that prickly pear shape and everything, but their growth habits tend to be very different than most other prickly pears, and and that being is the eastern prickly pear. A lot of times they grow in big clusters, but instead of being like these big tall plants like most of the prickly pears you see, they tend to like grow very low to the ground. Almost looks like they're dead flat on the ground, except for one little pad to be sticking up. Um, they like dry soil and they have to have full sun and things like that. So they are definitely a species that cannot be in wet or shaded areas. But they a lot of times grow in the coast, so a lot of times in the sandy soil, rocky soil, that is their preferred stuff. They have bright yellow flowers, and I think they're a super cool plant. I personally have one that I'm going to be setting up a bed that's going to be more of a sandy, rocky soil bed for them and a couple other species. But I just think it's cool how it's a plant you wouldn't expect to be in the southeast. Um, because like when you think of prickly pears, most of the time you think of Mexico or like the deserts like Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, all those states and stuff, but you don't think of North Carolina or the southeast in general. But they are here and they thrive. They do very well here. Um, yeah, they're just a very cool species. They also do produce the fruit just like other uh, prickly pear species. But they're just a very cool species. They tend to stay a lot smaller than the other species, though, as well.
Yeah, we have a ton of different kinds of prickly pear cactus here because I'm in the desert.
Yeah.
So we got a
Mhm.
whole lot of cactus. And have you ever eaten a prickly pear?
I have not.
Not as good as they hype it up to be. All right. A pro tip coming from me. If you guys go, like, come visit here and you go to the touristy areas, every shop is selling prickly pear, everything. They're like, "Oh, it's prickly pear jam and jelly and ice cream and candy and this and that." It's not that good. All right, there's a reason we farm strawberries and raspberries and grapes and all that, not prickly pears like that. They're not bad, they're just not very good. Um, they are nice
Dragon
when you
fruit.
can eat. Yeah, closer to that. If you eat them, if you eat them like, fresher, it is kind of a nice little treat.
Okay.
Uh, but that's, like, when you're in the desert, it's a nice little treat.
Well, yeah. It's 100 degrees, and it's like, ooh, something that has liquid.
Yeah, but cactus are also very underrated. They're beautiful too when they flower. All the
Oh
cactus
yeah.
here are starting to flower. Really nice flowers. Really cool.
Huge flowers
Oh,
too compared to the plant.
oh yeah. Yeah, way huge. In most cases.
Yeah,
Like
in most cases.
saguaros are not huge flowers, but
No,
they're super cool looking.
but prickly
We'll
pear.
get in, yeah, we'll do cactus when a lot of those on my episode because, well, not my episode, Arizona's native plant episode.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, we'll go into my next one here, and I'm going a little out of order because I want to save the best for last, arguably. Sarracenia purpurea. This is another one that's a really widespread range, but very, very cool. So this is a pitcher plant. So this catches plants in a pitfall style trap. It's exactly how it sounds. It's a pitcher plant. Looks like a pitcher. Full of goo, and Sarracenia purpurea in particular is very runny, water-like goo. You can touch it and you really wouldn't notice it's sticky or anything like that. This is a lower growing plant. It looks kind of like purple cabbage almost on the ground. Super cool looking. Some of the more northern versions of this plant are very hairy, uh, like the subspecies venosa. That's my personal favorite. Not necessarily native to North Carolina, I don't believe. Let me double check on that one. Um, yeah, no, sorry, I was wrong. Venosa is the one that's south. That one's my favorite. Really cool. I encourage you guys to look up pictures of that one. The reason I chose this one is its range is crazy to me. So when most people think carnivorous plants, they think of the jungle, right? That's
Hmm.
I'm sure you've heard that 1,000 times. I bet you wouldn't think Canadian. These are everywhere in Canada. They love it cold. Of course, there is subspecies that like it warm. They go all the way down into Florida. They also like it hot. But I've seen pictures of these fully frozen, all the way underwater, just frozen, and they'll come back to life. I've seen people will take a picture that is in a colder area and peel the leaf off, and all the goo inside is just frozen into a little popsicle. Super cool plant. Uh, in the research for this episode, actually, I found out. Let me just pull up my notes real quick just to make sure that I have this correct. That uh, they've trapped eastern newts at nearly a 20% catch rate. Oh, in about 20% of pictures, eastern newts were found in Ontario, Canada. And they were so 1 in 5 pictures had a eastern newt in it. And then so they were like, wow, that's interesting. Let's do more of that. And it took the salamanders 3 to 19 days to be killed in there. And
It's
that's
not a fun way to
crazy.
go.
No, but it just shows you how effective that trap is.
Oh
Even
yeah.
a newt, like, dude's got arms and legs. He can't escape for 2 weeks. So, very effective traps. And some of the other native Sarracenia species to North Carolina, which has some of the best Sarracenia, I just chose Purpurea. As this one, there's loads more. They'll fill all the way up to the top with bugs. They're so efficient at catching them. Sarracenia are definitely the kings of capturing bugs in the carnivorous plant world. They'll fill all the way up, and you can shake them, and it'll sound like maracas because it's just full of bug skeletons.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've seen lots of Sarracenia out towards the coast, and those are not hard to miss because they are like or they are hard to miss. I mean, not hard to miss. They are hard to miss because especially species like Flava, it'll be like, oh, grass, 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 giant patch of yellow pitcher plant that is
Yeah,
taller than everything else around it.
yeah, it's super cool. Venosa grows lower, probably the lowest growing that
Yeah.
I can name off the top of my head. But some of these other species will get huge. They'll get up to 4 feet tall.
Oh yeah, I've had Flava that I've like been close enough to where it was almost mid rib.
Yeah, it's super cool. Um, love those. Underrated in gardens. Start looking at
Yes.
gardens. They look really cool. They're like flowers that are permanent.
You do have to keep him in like a bog garden, but definitely underrated.
Yeah, yeah. They need a little special care, but it's not that hard.
Yeah, I feel like bog gardens in general are underrated, but that's a whole different topic.
Yeah, that's a whole episode. That's not even a
That's a
side
whole another
discussion.
episode. Um, I guess we'll go on to my second to last one. Um, so this one is one that I have liked for years and years. It is so I'm a little partial towards it, especially because the flower is one of my favorite colors in the entire world. But it's butterfly weed or butterfly milkweed or Asclepias tuberosa. So they it's a type of milkweed, but commonly it's not called milkweed. A lot of times it's just called butterfly weed, which is tends to be one of the more common names I've heard it under. And so it's it is a milkweed, but it is different slightly than most other milkweeds. So milkweeds tend to get the name milkweed from because when you snap them, the like milky white sap comes out, right? So butterfly weed has the same sticky properties and things like properties in the sap that makes it to where like when bugs chew on it, they can't open their mouths. Same properties like that, except when you snap them, their sap comes out clear. Um, They are bright orange flowers. They like it dry. They're not as tall as the other milkweeds either. They only get about 3 feet tall, but they like to spread. They're found all over the Piedmont and even into the coasts and things like that. And I think even into the mountains. I could be wrong on that part, but I'm pretty sure even to the mountains. Um, and they're just a very cool species. They are a host plant for monarchs, just like all the other milkweeds. Um, Also, there's other things that are their host plants for. I can't remember off the top of my head other than the monarchs, but the monarchs are the big thing. That is what mainly people grow them for. If you're wanting milkweed or you're wanting to help like species of like monarchs or other bugs and things like that, and you don't have a yard or you don't have a garden or things like that, butterfly weed can perfectly live in a pot its entire life, and they will be happy. Um, as long as it's a big enough pot, it doesn't have to be a huge pot, but a decent sized pot, and they will happily live in that in their entire life. So that's another cool thing with that species is not having to have a yard or have them go crazy or anything like that. Um, they're just a great species. There is cultivars and things like that of them as well. I tend to try and stay away from cultivars when it comes to planting natives and stuff. Not that all cultivars are bad or anything like that. Really, the only cultivars that would be bad is when they change the color of the flower or the color of the leaves. And the only reason they color the flowers is because a lot of times then the insects that normally go to them don't recognize them, and the color of the leaves because it changes all the chemicals and stuff inside of the leaves that can make it to where a bug that eats a plant that then now has red leaves instead of green leaves can't eat the one with red leaves because of different properties inside of it. It's a whole thing. But yeah, another really cool species found in grasslands and prairies and things like that, and fields, roadsides, all kinds of stuff all over North Carolina.
Yeah, I just recently actually saw a post on my Instagram. It was like, what native plants to plant instead of this or that, some other invasive species or
Mm.
species from like Asia or something. And this was on that list.
Butterfly weed is a very like
A
of the
really nice looking plant.
natives. Yeah, and of the natives, this is one that's like been very much so into cultivation and stuff. Like I know a lot of places are starting to go towards like having some natives and things like that, but like you've been able to get butterfly weed seeds from big box stores for years versus basically all other natives you cannot get at big box stores. At least seeds wise. Sometimes you can find them as a plant. Again, not very common either, but the butterfly weed you've been able to get there for years.
All right. I'm going to bring it into my last one. Save the best, well, most interesting for last. Everybody knows what this plant is, and everybody's probably killed one at some point. Dionea muscipula or the Venus flytrap. Everybody's shocked when they find out where this thing comes from. Has a very limited range in the North-South Carolina border. Not not very many of them left because they are kind of specialized, and I make fun of them a bit. They're really bad at staying alive. They have the most they have the most inefficient traps out of any of the carnivorous plants, and they're fairly picky on where they live.
Hmm.
So, not a not a great setup. Like we've kind of mentioned a bit before, carnivorous plants tend to live in areas that are bad to live if you're a plant. That's a reason they evolved to have to catch and eat prey because there's not much fertilizer or anything. So they tend to live in very harsh conditions, and then you're going to have really bad traps at that. But really cool, very unique, interesting plant. They have these trigger hairs. You have to touch two of them within a couple seconds of each other for the trap to seal, and then you have to hit those again, well, for the trap to close, and then you have to hit those trigger hairs a couple more times for it to seal. And then once it
Hmm.
seals, it essentially turns into a stomach, and it releases, digestive enzymes and fluids that will eat whatever's in there. And generally, they can take about 3 or 4 full seals before that trap will die off and be replaced with another. Uh, quick little science nerdy things on this one. Its closest living relative is actually the water wheel plants and Drosera's. We didn't talk about water wheels because they're not that cool. Aladravanda, you can look them up. They're kind of neat, but not as cool as this other stuff. And Drosera. So even though they look nothing like it, they are actually more closely related to that than anything else. And they're a monotypic genus, so that's it. In the genus Dionea, it's just Muscipula. Just them. It's they're really cool. Uh, they're super cool. The cultivars of them are crazy.
Oh yeah.
Uh, some of the some of the things people have bred out of these is insane. Bright red, huge. Some traps that are so deformed and weird looking that they can't even close anymore. It's nuts what you can do. So I really like when people create pots that are full of all the different cultivars of them, and it just looks like a flower arrangement because you have some that are tall, some that are short, some that are red, some that are green, even
Hmm.
white, there's variegated ones. So it looks like a flower arrangement, but it's all the same species of plant. I think that's really cool when people do that.
Yeah, it's such a cool species, and they actually like I know you'd said a very limited area, but they're actually endemic to only I think it's 100 square mile radius around uh like the border of North Carolina and South Carolina. It's like around Wilmington area. I think it's like 100 square miles around there, and they're endemic to only there. Um, they also have actually I've or listened to some stuff recently. Was talking about they've done more studies on them recently, and they tend to where pitcher plants and like sundews and stuff tend to actually grow more towards like the water and like the wet side of these like pine savannas and stuff that they are found in. Sundews kind of tend to grow more towards the middle, like right between the dry and the wet. And they have found a reason that they do that is because sundews, or not sundews, um, Venus flytraps, even more than like sundews and pitcher plants and stuff, rely so heavily on fire because once a fire comes through there and burns all of the grasses and stuff like that around them, which if again I've seen these in their natural habitat, they are not just a oh look there's a patch of Venus flytraps by themselves. They are densely competing with native grasses and native forbs and things like that that are growing right next to them. And these are all plants that get way taller than these plants. So they heavily rely on these fires to come through and burn out the forbs and the grasses. And then within a single growing season, these Venus flytraps will be back up and growing and having traps and everything before the forbs or the grasses can even attempt to come back yet.
Yeah, that is the thing that they're really good at, is going dormant. So,
Yes.
it used to be believed, and still is pretty widely believed, that they need to go dormant. They need a winter time. So, you'd see people put them in the fridge in the winter and allow them to go dormant. But as more stuff comes out, we're learning that they actually don't need dormancy, and dormancy is more of a survival instinct. So, like those fires that come through, they are totally okay with going dormant and allowing all their leaves to die and going back into a little rhizome. And then when the conditions are better, they pop back up like nothing ever happened.
Yep. And they do it very fast.
Yeah, like you'll see people who have all their nice fly traps, and then a couple weeks later, there's just nothing there. And then when spring comes around, they pop right back up. They're
Yep.
really good at going dormant when they need to.
They are super fire resistant and things like that. Like in their native environment, if there is not fire, they would get outcompeted in a heartbeat. So they rely so heavily on fire, it's insane. Um, but that's why they tend to like grow more towards the drier area because the fire doesn't really go so far into the really wet areas. Or if it does, it's a lot cooler of a fire, so it doesn't burn as much around it. So they rely so heavily on the fire taking out these grasses and other things that they tend to grow kind of in that middle area where the fire's still gonna be hot enough to kill all the grasses and forbs and stuff around them, but not too dry where they're not getting the moisture that they need. Um, and there again, another one that's super easy to just walk by and not even realize they're there because the plants in the wild are maybe half an inch off the ground. Like they aren't like the ones you see in the stores and stuff where they're up and nice and tall or like looking like a upright vertical plant. Most of the time they're pretty flat and spread out to the sides.
Yeah. Last thing I'll note on them is this is just a little interesting fun fact. Their traps actually work underwater. So they can be flooded and they can catch little tadpoles, aquatic bugs, even a small fish in a flood. So that is kind of neat. You would think that the water would trigger those hairs, and it doesn't. So they can actually be fully submerged.
Yeah, they're doing more research on the hairs and stuff because it's seeming more and more like the more we've learned about them, it almost seems like this plant almost kind of has a brain, which I'm not saying it does obviously, but it's seeming more than just triggering hairs. Like, you know what I mean? It's seeming more than just a stimulant response.
Yeah, no, it's very weird. I mean, like I mentioned about Charles Darwin talking about the Drosera. That was actually a thing he was talking about. He's like, these are so sensitive,
Hmm.
right? Like because Drosera also responds stimulus,
Yes.
very similar to, just not as dramatically, but very similar to the fly traps, and no surprise, they're closely related. So Charles Darwin has tons of quotes and things about that. How he's like, they're so receptive to what they move to and why. That
Mhm.
it's very interesting. Drosera won't move to non-food items. If you put an inorganic thing on them, they won't wrap it up. But
Yeah.
if you put something they can eat, they'll wrap it up and eat it. Very interesting. Super cool. It seems like the more we learn, the less we realize that we know.
Oh
Like
yeah.
we think we have it figured out, and then we realize we know nothing yet.
And then one last thing for the VS flytraps before I go into my last one. I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure I've been told before that almost like 80 to 90% of the Venus flytraps in the like cultivation, like in the hobby and things like that, are all clones of each other because it's illegal to take them from the wild, and a lot of people aren't seed growing them. Um, it might have changed more recently.
There's a lot of true cultivars out there, so those have to be clones.
Yeah,
We'll do an episode on what a cultivar is at some
'cause
point.
I was pretty sure the majority of them are clones. Like even the ones that are just like the green non-cultivar ones, they're all mostly clones of a single plant, like, or
Yeah,
single plants that came out originally.
yeah. So they're super easy to propagate through those rhizomes. So it's easier to propagate them than it is to grow from seed. They're quite slow when you grow from seed. It takes about 5 to 7 years to grow from seed all the way to a flowering sized specimen again. So that's a very slow process. So actually, most of them are propagations and clones from somewhere or another. So
Yeah.
that is true. Most of them you see are not seed grown. All right, but take us into the last one that you have.
Yeah, so my last one is another one of my favorite trees just because of the leaf structure, but other reasons as well. This is one of the, believe it is the number one keystone plant species in North Carolina. Not this specific species, but this genus in general. They're all keystone plants in North Carolina, and they are the number one genus for keystones plants in North Carolina. And which keystone plants, for people that don't know, that means basically they support the most wildlife and most diversity of wildlife. Um, so my last one is going to be Quercus falcata, which is the southern red oak, or the swamp red oak, or swamp Spanish oak, water oak, a bunch of different common names. But the southern red oak is the most common the most common name. That's a mouthful. Um, But this species is just from the aspect of like being a keystone species is so cool because when I made sure to do research before the show, and this species alone supports over hundreds of thousands of insect species are supported by this plant. This is a host plant for hundreds of different insect species. There's hundreds of insect species that eat the leaves, hundreds of insect species that eat the bark and live in the actual tree itself or live on the bark and things like that. Hundreds of species that live in the roots and eat on the roots and things like that. It supports so much insect wildlife. It is absolutely insane. And not only that, then it produces acorns in the fall, which is another thing for things like squirrels, deer, birds, all hundreds of other species that eat off of these acorns and live off these acorns for the winter. They get their name, red oak, too, from in the mostly from the wood, but also in the winter, their leaves will turn a nice bright red. Um, and an easy way to tell a red oak from a white oak's leaves, they have rounded lobed leaves. Red oaks are all pointed leaves. But again, another just amazing species that is amazing for wildlife conservation and things like that. They get very large. They can grow between 60 to 100 feet tall and spread 50 to 60 feet wide. And they're found basically all the way up to anything below 200 or 2,000 feet of elevation. Anything from the coast up to 200,000 feet of elevation, you can find southern red oaks. Um, it takes about 2 years from the mature to be able to produce acorns and things like that. Excuse me. They're a very drought tolerant tree. They're a great shade tree. And again, it's just the high value wildlife conservation type plant that this does. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, one of the coolest host species, at least personally, I think is one of the coolest host species that it does, is the imperial moth, which is a gorgeous moth, gorgeous caterpillar, and so they lay their eggs on these trees, and uh, their caterpillars grow up on them and things like that. And they're just an amazing, beautiful species. And there's so many other ones. Just to name a few, there's again the imperial moth. There's the banded hair streak, the Edwards hair streak, gray hair streak, white M hair streak, the Horace's dusky wing, and the juvenile's dusky wing. Which these are all mostly moth species. Um, and that's another thing a lot of people don't realize. There is so many more moth species than butterfly species. It's insane. And they're also very much so important pollinator plant or species important pollinators for plants and from like vegetables all the way to flowers and things like that. But the fact that this one tree supports hundreds of thousands of species is just absolutely insane to me.
Yeah, I need to get into trees more. I don't know a ton about trees, but they're always so cool. They're the apartment buildings of, Mother Earth. Like
Oh yeah,
everything lives in them, on them,
yeah,
or needs. Trees are just homes for so many things. And you think about bugs being like, oh, I don't care about bugs, but you have to think about what eats the bugs. Okay, now what eats that? And then you follow that all the way up the food chain, and you're like, oh wait, maybe I do care about bugs.
yep.
All sorts of things, even all the way down to disease prevention can come down to trees.
And I will say, people who are like, "Oh, ew, bugs! I don't care about bugs." I will say, most people, yes, I understand that. That's cool, but also know that if bugs were to disappear within 3 months, everything on Earth would be dead. All humans, all other and life forms, all plants, within 3 months, they would all be dead if bugs disappeared. They are essential for Earth to function. Um, and not just pollinators, not just butterflies or moths or bumblebees and things like that, which those are very, very important species and genuses and things like that. But all bugs in general are so extremely important. You don't have to like them, but you do have to try and keep them and try and help them survive and continue to thrive, because without them, we'd have no food, we'd have no plants, we'd have no vegetables, no fruits, no garden plants anywhere. I mean, we would die when within 3 months if they disappeared.
Yeah, definitely we need bugs. Bugs are cool. But yeah, plants are super neat. We have a lot of really cool species native to us and the United States. Lots of really cool things. I want to do some of these in Europe as well, because
Yeah.
a lot of Europe has been deforested over thousands of years and been replaced with a lot of invasive species or not a lot. But there's some really cool stuff from Europe that we just don't even recognize as European anymore just because Europe's looked so different for
Oh
so
yeah.
long now that we forget
And
how cool it actually is.
that and it's kind of cool how with Europe, or I think it's not so cool, but it's interesting, I guess, more the better term for it. How a lot of our invasives like dandelions and all the grasses and stuff like that, they all come from Europe. A lot of their invasives come from the US. Like there's tree species and other things that we see every single day and go, "Oh, that's normal. That's whatever. It's all over the place. It's supposed to be here. It's native." And they're taking over European ecosystems and overrunning them.
Yeah, Ireland's an example of that, like, a lot of the forests in Ireland just essentially got replaced.
Yep.
They were primarily one species, and then they are now primarily an invasive species, so very interesting,
Hmm.
but that'll about do it for this episode. Um, I went hard in the paint on carnivorous plants because 'cause I'm not gonna get to do that very often in this series, so when I can, I'm taking advantage of it because carnivorous plants are my favorite by far, of course.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think I almost, to be honest, kind of want to try and do all 50 states. Obviously, start with R2, but kind of want to try and do that. If y'all would be interested in that, let us know down in the comments. But we definitely want to do things like Europe and also other like Asian different countries and stuff like that as well. But I think it'd be kind of cool to just like for us to do some research and find some really cool native plants and that aren't native to other states that we've done and go over them for all 50 states.
Yeah, that would be cool too. Do all 50 states, some Canada, some Mexico,
Yep. Different
try to
countries,
cover
but
yeah,
yeah.
try to cover everywhere, that'd be super cool.
Oh yeah.
Alright, so if you made it this far, leave a comment, let us know you made it. Um, Genuinely curious to see who watches all of these.
And if there's a state y'all want us to do, let us know.
Yeah, it's a real good way to get number 1 on the list is leave a comment. Um,
Yeah.
so we will see you guys on the next one.
See y'all later.